afternoon, and welcome to the show where we try and find solutions to the most heavily debated topics. Today on the back porch, we are going to attempt to figure out which sport is really the hardest. As we look at the level of danger, physical demand, need for endurance, and the mental toughness these activities entail, we will be working to rank just a few sports based on scientific findings as well as multiple accredited studies.
As we all know, the answer to this controversial issue is debated among athletes and sports fanatics all the time. When you research the hardest sports rankings, it is typical to find many different variations. This is due to the fact that some are ranked based on physical demand of the sport, whereas others look more at the mental aspect and mental strength needed to partake in certain sports.
As sports fans, we do realize there are many things to consider, so we have come to the conclusion that the best way to argue this topic is to break it down into categories that make certain sports more difficult than others. More specifically, we have found the top 4 most difficult sports. The first one being base jumping as the most dangerous, the second one, boxing, as the most physically demanding, then we have cross country requiring the most endurance, and lastly, swim as the most mentally challenging sport.
First, we're going to hear about base jumping and the danger it entails.
Human beings are constantly placing themselves in dangerous situations. Every time we drive a car, cross the street, or even go out for a night, we are placing ourselves in harm's way. However, there are those adrenaline junkies who are not satisfied with the risks associated with everyday life and need to go the extra mile to feel that thrill they are looking for. The most dangerous sport is not agreed upon by many professionals, although the title is often given to base jumping. The term base stands for building, antenna, span, and earth. This acronym demonstrates essentially all the sport entails. It involves leaping off various heights with a parachute. Although jumpers have the use of a parachute, the heights they are jumping from do not provide enough fall time for athletes to deploy their reserve chutes. The sport is illegal virtually everywhere, so it's often practiced illegally without a safety team on hand. Ultimately, the most dangerous sport is up for debate. When researching, it is unlikely to find any agreeing websites. However, World Atlas and Oxford scholars agree that the deadliest sport is base jumping. And now to Mikkel Wilson with boxing.
Every sport has many physical demanding aspects. Most sports require their athletes to train 5 days out of the week, roughly to 3 to 5 hours a day. This is very common for most athletes, but some sports require their athletes to perform more physical demands than others. And from this, I have found that boxing is the most physical demanding sport known across the world. When it comes to boxing, you are asked to train every single inch of your body, especially your brain. Boxers perform for 12 rounds. Those rounds are roughly 2 to 3 minutes long, and in between the rounds, you only have 1 minute rest. This concludes that boxers usually use 70 to 80% of anaerobic exercises. And this means that boxers stress their muscles at a high intensity for short periods of time. Boxing requires their athletes to be intellect. They need them to be mentally strong enough to compete. They have to have the perceptual motor skills to best adapt to punches and then be able to move around swinging arms after being hit. Their motor skills need to be under control. This takes a lot of mental and physical training to complete. On average, it takes boxers at least 10,000 hours of training to master these skills. And on top of that, they have to do their high intensity weightlifting, high intensity endurance training, which includes long distance running, short distance intervals, middle distance sprints, which are terrible in my opinion, and they have to do a lot of dieting on top of that. I think the main reason boxing is considered the most physically demanding sport is just because of the punching aspect. You're punching people back and forth, and it's constantly who can get up faster, who can be on their feet lighter. And to be able to receive a hit and still give hits is highly challenging. It's a very motivational sport, and that's why I believe it's one of the most physical demanding sports.
Thank you. And now for cross country. Endurance is defined as the power to withstand an unpleasant or difficult process or situation without giving way. When it comes to sports, endurance is a kind of unspoken requirement that demands the participants sustain a high activity level while experiencing physical stress. The level of stamina involved in each sport varies, and one might find they have a higher endurance level in one sport compared to another. When a person practices a certain activity, their endurance level acclimates to that specific motion. This may make it seem as though determining the sport with the most endurance is near impossible, but there are certain sports that are universally recognized as the most tiring. ESPN rates cross country as the most enduring sport. When long, hard, and continuous exercise occurs, the aerobic system is being maximized. Those who have a fine-tuned aerobic system have great endurance and can withstand higher physical stress. Cross-country runners have a strong aerobic system that is superior to that of athletes participating in other sports. While every sport demands that athletes are able to endure pain of different kinds, cross-country is considered to require the most endurance.
As athletes and competitors, it is easy to let nerves get to you. We all know that stress and anxiety before a big competition, game, race, or even work meeting can determine our performance. Most of the time, too much stress can be the cause for lower performance levels. Gaining control of your nerves is not an easy task, but one that is necessary for people everywhere. In the sports world, athletes are faced with stress and extreme nerves all of the time. Through much examination, Dr. Michelle Cleary states that swim is the most mentally challenging sport. Swim is, for the most part, an individual sport. Individual sports can prove to be more stress-inducing because all the pressure to succeed is on the individual. As a previous athlete, now spectator, and doctor, Cleary has noticed a common trend among elite swimmers. She states that swimmers often fall into a 7-day sabotage cycle, where for 7 days swimmers start to doubt their abilities and worry about the competition ahead. Olympic swimmer Elka Graham says that during training, 90% of the focus is on physical ability, whereas 10% is a mental race. She then goes on to say, but in the races it's 90% mental because there is very little that separates us, the competitors, physically at the elite level. It is true that in many sports athletes are faced with nerves and must overcome any built-up stress in order to perform to the best of their ability. After much research, swim has made the #1 spot for being the most mentally challenging sport, and rightfully so. While physical strength and technique are important to swim, the mental challenge is a roadblock that swimmers must overcome before every race.
We may never agree which sport is the most difficult, but according to our sources, swimming, cross-country, boxing, and base jumping are among the most intense.
Thank you for tuning into our broadcast, where today we found which sport is truly the toughest.
This concludes today's segment of
The Back Porch.